I hope it works. Yes, it's working. Yes.
Oh, good.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you very much for coming. Today is a very special day. It's that night of the month where we discuss about a movie that we all watched previously, and we this month we watched The Wave, which is a movie based in the real events that took place in the spring of 1967 in California, in Palo Alto. The story tells, we know the story that took place. The was with a professor, a teacher, high school teacher, Ron Jones, and we started, now I know, with 90 students and spread in the school, but we are going to know more about that. And one of these students is our esteemed Mark Hancock. Both are here, and it's my great pleasure to well, I think we should start by asking for Ron to talk a little bit about him, what he's doing. I know already, but I think it would be nice if you could introduce yourself, and then we are going to hear a little bit from Mark. And we usually love to have questions from everybody. So you guys just raise a hand. I'm taking notes. So I will make sure that everybody who asks a time will be able to ask your questions. With that said, Citizens for Global Solutions Minnesota, welcome Ron Jones and Mark Hancock. Ron, it's your floor.
My pleasure. Well, first of all, hello from San Francisco. I'm sure we're all feeling a lot better with the election and the inauguration and the promise of a new day. The WAVE took place quite a few years ago. It was a classroom experiment, took place in 5 days. It was an attempt to explain the feelings associated with authoritarian fascism, the appeal of giving up our freedom for some one voice. I think what's most important about the experiment are the things we don't talk about, and that's that women were the primary protesters. That's seldom mentioned in the documentation about the WAVE. And the lie itself, looking at the recent events, I realized that the WAVE also had that component of a lie that propelled students into this alternate universe. In this case, it was a rally. So that's a basic summation of the WAVE. It's like a ghost story that simply refuses to go away. Unfortunately, Mark's here, so he can give the student perspective. But I'm here and I'd be happy to answer any questions you have about it.
Thank you, Ron.
Okay, I'm Mark Hancock, and I was one of Ron's students in the WAVE class. We were in Cumberly High School in Palo Alto, California in late March, early April was when this class held. We were in 10th grade. We were 15 years old. And it was our first year in this new school. It was also Ron's first full year teaching. He was 25 or 26. We were 15. And we loved him. He was the most popular teacher in school. He was young like us. He was a lot of fun. He's extremely positive. He always makes you feel good when you talk to him. He gives you his full attention. And so he was already very popular and charismatic before this happened. And we'd already had him for half a year. So we trusted him. And as you've seen and heard, we learned a great lesson in how one should be a little more questioning about who they follow and also pay a little more attention to the groups that they're part of or that they may choose to join or not. So it started out as a lot of fun. It was a fun game at the beginning, and that's on all the different versions of the story. That's the case. And then for me, it became confusing. Like, wait a minute, we're saying some good things, but we got some bad behavior going with it. And then toward the end, it scared the heck out of me as he became the tyrannical leader that this led to. So at the end, I was scared to death. So the story now has a life of its own, and some of you know, it happened in '67. Ron did a short story in '76 that was in the old Whole Earth catalog. Stuart Brand published it. And then Norman Lear made the 1981 movie that was on ABC TV, got an Emmy for it. It was a recreation of our story, and pretty accurate, actually. Then in '76, excuse me, in '81, they also did a book that summarized the Norman Lear movie, and that book has sold millions of copies in classrooms around the world because they use this story to help kids understand how extremism can get started. This story is very popular in Germany. It's extreme. Almost everybody in Germany knows this story, either having studied it in school or watched the 2008 movie that you just saw, which the German team made. 2010 was the first documentary that Ron and I helped with, along with, it was put together by another former student, Phil Neal, who I talked about tonight, but he was too busy, unfortunately. He still works on TV shows down in LA, and he's busy making shows tonight. That was 2010. Then in 2000, I have to remember my chronology. It just this has a life of its own. It just keeps rolling and rolling and rolling. The German film Invisible Line came out in 2019, and that's the second documentary, and it was done by the History Channel in Germany. And Ron and I both spent a lot of time with them on that, and it's still rolling out now. It's still a very new film. It's been on TV in some countries, been in a few film festivals, but I think in the next year you'll see it a lot more. Did I forget anything, Ron?
I think that feature film Diwella was pretty fascinating, and then the Netflix series We Are the Wave is kind of an extension of the story.
That was, I think, also 2019, I believe, and that was a German one put together by the same team that did the 2008 movie. But it's the funniest thing at the Netflix miniseries is that the teacher disappears. So instead of being a charismatic teacher, it's a charismatic student that leaves the kids. So it's kind of funny. They got one season. I think there's 6 episodes, and you can find it here. So basically now we support people who use the film. It's used by teachers all around the world. Ron and I have been to several countries and Zoom to several more. And we are honored that people use this story to prompt these kind of discussions. And we appreciate being invited tonight. Thank you.
You know, Mark, I think it really comments on the fact that we all need to be valued and wanted, and that touched on that nerve ending. And we all want to be a part of a group. That's another kind of personal instinct we have. And those instincts led to compliance into the wave, the idea of being wanted, valued, because the oddity was that a lot of the students in the wave were those that were primarily quiet and not involved, and they become very active.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I have a question for both of you. Ron, after the week or the 2 weeks were over, do you think there were, left more people, more students were grateful or resenting you? And Mark, okay, go ahead.
That's a great question. I just answered a German student just yesterday. I think, Mark, you got that email too. She was asking what happened after the wave. And actually, the wave was a secret for 10 years. I think all of us felt somewhat ashamed and wanted to forget it and get on with our lives, similar to our feelings today. So the wave remained that quiet existence until one day a student came up to me and gave me the salute, and that prompted the writing of the story. But I think silence was our primary reaction to the wave.
Is that shame?
Oh yes, yes. Questioning oneself, why did we so easily become the people we became, including myself, because I liked the wave. I like the order. I like the discipline. I like the adulation. It's pretty addictive.
And for both of you, Mark, I know that some other reporter asked you before, do you still think that we all have an evil or a fascist within? That's for both of us.
I've heard Ron say this, and I agree with him. I think fascism can happen to anybody, any place, and any time. And the more I study it, the more I think a lot of it is circumstantial. I think people are capable of great good and great evil. And it's everybody's now finally saying democracy is fragile, but Ron and I have been saying that for a long time. And the teachers we visit with are always saying that. And it's especially true now, but it always is it's when society becomes complacent that the bad things rise up, and they're always down there. You've got to just deal with them. So I think everybody's capable of it at one time or another. And as Ron says also, and it's not just in government or society. It can happen in a home or in an organization, religious organization, school, or anywhere. It's when you get people, when the bullies rise up, we've got to push back.
I've always felt that people are basically good, because if you feel that they're basically evil, then you need police and armament and all chaos. I think we're capable of democracy. We're capable of ruling ourselves in a socially justice way. I've always felt that. However, knowing that, I realize that most of our institutions do not have a democratic forum. The school I taught in, there was no democracy. There was no exchange of ideas. There was no sharing of where we are, what we're doing, or why we're doing it. And I think that same questioning exists in the home, in the place of religion, in the place of work. I mean, if we think about democracy as being the alternative to some kind of authoritative rule, then where is democracy? When do we experience it?
Dick has a question. Dick, if you can introduce yourself for those who don't know you yet.
I'm Dick Bernard. I'm part of the Global Solutions Group. I'm just delighted that you gentlemen are with us tonight. I watched both the lesson plan and the WAVE film in the last couple of days, and there couldn't be more pertinent timing than right now after January 6th. And I was telling Ron before the rest of you came on that I was an 8th grade geography teacher in 1966, 67. So I was working with 8th graders at that time, and it was a new school in suburban Minneapolis. I want to make just a comment. It's a sort of a troubling comment. The topic, at least as it was framed in the movie, was authoritarianism, and anarchy was another piece of this off to the side in the German film. And democracy was sort of a silent part of this. Back in 1966, 67, and afterwards was sort of a progressive time for public education. We were given opportunities, even here, to do things that nowadays would not be allowed, even for 8th graders. We could do innovative curriculum around environmental stuff. So what you got to do in Palo Alto, I think, was sort of a nationwide movement in the late 60s. But the troubling piece of this for me was that as I started to think about this, that democracy is such a wonderful thing, but to work, it needs participation from the people who benefit from it. And there's a tendency, I think, for most of us, and perhaps it was reflected in the kids also, it's easier to complain about somebody who is in authority than to be the authority yourself in a democratic society. So, and then, so you have a tendency to follow orders and then complain about who's giving the orders silently. And it sort of creates a mess in all levels of society, today it included. Democracy is always in peril because of that. And there's lots more to that particular thread. And I'm wondering if any of you agree with this or disagree with it. I've seen it too many times over my lifetime. I'm 80 now, and it's a sort of a recurrent theme in groups I've been involved with and what I did as a teacher and so forth. Anybody care to comment on that?
Well, since you and I are still in the same club, being 80s,
Yeah.
I think democracy needs questioning. And one of the elements of the wave was the failure of questioning by fellow teachers or by parents or by students themselves or by the teacher. That lack of questioning led to this slide into this other reality. And truth telling, we think a lot about the news today being valuable to us. There's no questioning, no examination of what might be true. Those things were missing in the wave. And they were missing in society here for quite a while. I think Black Lives Matter, for instance, is a great questioning of our association with the future in terms of racial identities and purposes and possibilities. We need questioning.
Gail, I think that's the question.
I'm curious as to how accurate the film was in portraying what happened in the classroom. For example, at the end of the film, there's a kid who commits suicide and threatens.
Oh, you saw that film.
That was a different film?
You saw the German film.
Oh.
Yeah, Ron, that's the main one they watched.
Oh, well, if you'd see Lesson Plan. Now, Lesson Plan is a documentary.
Oh, okay.
A documentary made by the students. So it's their perspective of what happened.
Oh.
And
I saw
Gail,
the first 10 minutes is all. I'll watch the rest after this.
So to answer your question, when we go speak in Germany, the first two questions I have to answer is, no, the teacher did not go to jail, and no, nobody got shot and killed. But one other interesting anecdote is, if you ever get a hold of the European DVD of this film, of the Devella film you just watched, with The Wave in German, the DVD has extras on it. One of which is Ron visiting the set, which is a lot of fun because he's meeting with them on the set in the classroom. But the other is that there was an alternate ending to this movie, and they filmed it. And the alternate ending, the student with the gun, rather than shooting somebody, hands the gun back to the teacher. And that's the end of the movie. So it has a more peaceful ending. What I remember, Ron, was that Gansel, the director, told us they had tested what I would call the soft ending on a theater audience of kids. And when it was over, the kids all left the theater saluting each other. And they thought that those kids missed the point. So they put in the hard ending with the shooting to drive the point home. So if you want to see the soft ending, you buy the German DVD and you can actually watch it. But it's always interesting that that's how they made that decision. They wanted to make sure that kids watching this film got it, and they gave it to the kids the way they're watching. Movies today are more violent than they were in the old days, and so they gave them a film like they're used to. It's rock and roll, it's fast paced, and it's got some violence in it. And
Mark, the ending of that Devella film also has the teacher being arrested and taken away.
Yeah.
And there's a still photograph of the teacher's eyes, but that message says it's the leader that's the problem. I've never felt it's the leader that's the problem. We're the problem. It's what the people do that's the problem.
Yeah,
but the German film has a Hitler ending.
Yeah, I agree.
My granddaughter was in France, and Mitterrand was speaking. She was on the stage, and she came off the stage, and my granddaughter was talking. She said, "That's not the ending. That's not the ending."
Eduardo Drake has a question.
Yeah, thank you, Katja. Yeah, I'm tracking the conversation very closely, and Mark mentioned the word that when society becomes, or the phrase, the idea when society becomes too complacent. And then there was a notion of authoritarianism. And then I heard the part author in that, right? Authorship is embedded in that idea. And then the word question. And question really is a process of searching, right? Looking for something. And I'm curious, Mark, can you talk more about this complacency that you think and characterize what are the elements of that, and so that we might be on the lookout for it and understand it.
Yeah, I continue to process this experience and also how we share the story and how we can better do it going forward. But when I go into a classroom and help a teacher who's using the story, I figure if we can at least teach the kids critical thinking, then we've accomplished something. I don't have to teach them every message that this story has. And this story can be approached from a lot of different directions. But my bottom line is transparency in government and critical thinking. And if you've got if everything is open in front of you and people will take the time to think about it, I think we can take a lot of these issues a long ways. And those are the two things I've kind of come back to after struggling with all this. As Ron said, we can blame it on a charismatic leader, but I think that's the easy way out. It's even easier when you call them monsters or other bad terms, because they're not monsters, they're human beings, and they are capable of good and bad like the rest of us. They just happen to, and we've enabled them to head in the bad direction. I agree with Ron. I think it's the followers who enable the leaders ultimately. And I lean that way. It's again, at the beginning, 30, 40, 50 years ago, it was pretty easy to say that Ron was charismatic and we all followed him because we loved him and we'd had him half a year. And we'd actually done a few experiments before this one, but they were short and easy. So we got sucked right into it. And then the sense of camaraderie, of course. But it's the followers who enable the leaders. And as Ron often says, nobody stood up completely and challenged him during this time period. No adults. And only a couple students, toward the end. And so it was. I don't know if that answers your question, but my biggest concern is, and also if somebody's going to have critical thinking, there's a couple things behind that. They need to have empathy and they need to be curious. And it's hard to get some people to be empathetic, as we've seen, and it's especially hard for a lot of people who are either busy or just never grew up curious to actually be interested in gathering information and processing it, spending the time, which is a lot of people are in a hurry these days, to actually understand something. So even with critical thinking, you've got to have curiosity and empathy if you're going to really go in the right direction with it. But you got to start with teaching kids to challenge everything that's put in front of them these days, everything.
Yeah, it's interesting about that is I think that kids are born that way, challenging everything and going to the no phase. And I think that I'm curious about whether or not people are seeing that our society is working against that. All societies and conspiracy against the individual. It seems like there's like the complacency that I was wondering if you were feeling into, is this idea that we're all like these vessels of energy just looking to be expressed. And we're looking I saw the movie recently from '81, A Quest for Fire, right? We're all looking for something to feel more alive and awake. And when something comes along and promises or offers a gateway for that, everyone is ready to rush through like we're all bunched in a balloon ready to pop. And when someone comes along and provides a small pathway for it, we don't even know how to handle it because we've been so pent up. Does that resonate with your sort of experience of what might have happened?
That's part of it. Part of it too is one of the things I struggle with, which is actually kind of entertaining for me, is how do you define extremism? And because it's extremism and fascism, people argue about those definitions all the time. And I use extremism a lot, but what does that mean? And so I think it goes back to what you're saying is when people are pent up. So to release that energy often takes an issue. And I think to me, extremism is when somebody puts their issue ahead of other human beings. And I think that kind of goes back to what you were just saying is if you have all this energy and an issue turns you loose, if you're so passionate about your issue that you're willing to abuse or kill other people, whether it's left or right, to me, that's extremism. And it's funny, if you go to the dictionaries, the most common definition for extremism is that something that varies from the norm. And that kind of challenges me to think, well, is that really the definition I'm looking for? And it's a lot of fun to take that one on. But I think that's part of it. What is where you're going with the pent up energy is issues can cause people to come together and bring out people's passions. And the question is when those passions lesson plan, for those of you who've seen it, Alyssa says, you know, groups can be good, but to what end? And so it's the ends, the means and the ends are sort of the discussion when you get into it that way.
I have a couple of questions about that, where that critical thinking comes from. I'm always, I'm surprised, and I've never been able to explain, why was it that two women in the class protested? And why was it that my wife picked up the danger and alerted me to the fact that I'd lost playfulness, I'd lost my curiosity, I'd lost my kindness? So I've never been able to understand that totally, but I know it's there for me. And you should also know that following the wave, students were interested in the war in Vietnam, and there was critical thinking about that led to some very strong protests by a group called Venceremos and other student groups. And again, where did that come from? It's not something I knew coming out of the classroom per se, but maybe it came out of the sudden need not to be killers.
Well, one of the issues is we boys were subject to the draft at 18, and we weren't allowed to vote till we were 21. So we could go die before we could vote. And so we were not happy about that.
So Dick, this is the times that you experienced. This is something that most of the group here did not fathom, that feeling of rampant change. Women were, the pill was available. Women were fighting for their rights. My wife, for instance, would be challenged. She was making cookies for the students to come over to our house, and the students would say, "Women don't make cookies, women make revolution." So it was the times they were a-changing.
We have a couple of questions. I will go in order. Fred is asking, for both of you, how did this become so intense within 1 week? A week for a teacher or a 15-year-old student can fly by so fast. How did each day build so intensely on the other to culminate with the manner that it did?
Well, again, just this week I was answering some letters from Germany, and that was one of the questions. How did it come about so quickly? And I think curiosity overwhelmed us in the classroom about ourselves and where we were going. I think excitement replaced regularity or predictability, unknown, surprise, the feeling of being exhilarated. These were all personal feelings that took over time. Time like we normally exist, a regular event, things to expect, was simply eradicated. We were in the moment. That's a fascinating place to be in.
Sounds like tango.
What do you think, Mark?
Yeah. But speaking of which, a few years back, tango reminds me also of Argentina, and having been to Buenos Aires and seen tango. And I had a professor from Toronto call me for a WAVE interview a few years ago, and it turns out she was born and raised in Argentina during the Dirty War. Oh. And I asked her, I said, what was it like growing up during the Dirty War in Argentina? And she said, fear. Right off the bat, she said fear. And every once in a while, I see things that remind me of how she said that. If you ever want to talk to her, I can connect you to her. She's a professor, I think, at the University of Toronto. So for how it happened fast, a couple things. One is most of this kind of bad stuff doesn't happen fast. There's a whole lead-up process, and Trump didn't happen overnight. Most things don't happen overnight. There's a process. In the case of Ron, the process was that we'd had him 6 months. We loved him. We were already on board. He could have done almost anything he wanted with us. He had done experiments before, and of course, being 67, there was a ton of energy just in the air in general, in the school, we're in the San Francisco Bay Area, so we're loaded with energy at that point. I mean, 3 months later, we're all hippies on Haight-Ashbury, so watching Jimi Hendrix. So it didn't take long for our world was changing quickly at that time. At the time of the wave, we were listening to the Beach Boys, but they hadn't quite happened yet, but it was close. But the other thing is, once it got started, there were two phases to it. And those of you who've seen the documentary can see that. It started out as fun. It started out where our grades were what we were doing it for. He said, yes, if you're a loyal, an active party member, you get an A. If you just go along with it, I'll give you a C. If you mess with me, I'm going to get, or mess up, I'm going to give you an F. But he did say, if your revolution succeeds, I'll give you an A. So that got, some of us boys got attention to that, but never pulled it off. But so at the beginning, it was fun. It was a fun teacher, fun activity. Your grades are on the line. By the way, Palo Alto has some of the best schools in the United States. So nearly all of us were going to college, and we knew we needed to get an A in this class. So at the beginning, that was all we needed to hear. But as he rolled it out day after day, and it became more and more strict and more oppressive at the end, you begin to have second thoughts to some extent, and also you were beginning to wonder, well, what's going to happen next. It changed every single day, and I think that's an important part of these kinds of things too, is the constant change, the confusion, the chaos, the change. Ron was very unpredictable always, and we didn't know from day to day what he was going to do. So it was hard to get your bearings. And then ultimately what happened is as I think this happened in Davila, right? He came in a few days into it, and he closed the curtains and he said, this is real. And this is not a game. We threw some kids out of class that they were the ones that weren't going to behave. You're the special ones. And we're gonna take this forward as part of a national movement. You are one of 1,025 other high schools doing this right now in the United States. And this is before the internet. We had no way of challenging him. Plus, we trusted Ron and you couldn't question him by that time, even if you wanted to. You'd be thrown out of class because if you asked questions, he would throw you out. But then he linked it to the Vietnam War and the government. And so he said, Republicans and Democrats cannot run this country. We're in Vietnam. You boys are about to go. And we're going to form a third political party in the United States. You're part of the vanguard you're the student vanguard of that movement. And at the end of the week, a national leader is going to, the phrase he used, because I remember it, first time I'd heard it, is that a national leader, political leader, will go out on a limb and cut it off and announce this new third political party. At which point, a lot of us are very enthusiastic about this new third political party, and I will confess I still want one. And I do choices in every election, especially since in my mind, they're all owned by Wall Street. But we'll do that for another phone call. Anyway, and of course, we're all wondering who that leader is. And a lot of us thought it was Robert F. Kennedy, which when you think about it, that's kind of an odd name to link to this. But if we're going to do a third party that's going to take over the country and get us out of Vietnam, he was a logical person to consider. So that's how it went fast. Is there was a lot of lead up, and Hitler had what his putsch was in 24, and he didn't take power until January of 33. So I mean, these things don't happen overnight. They take time, and you have to be. And we all, as you all know better than me, we have to be alert, aware, and push back during that early period, because ultimately, when they get the upper hand, we're screwed.
It's important to realize that only the first day was scripted or thought about as a lesson plan, Dick. Every other day, every other moment was improvisational. Very much like Trump. When you watch Trump speak, it's improvisational. That's what was happening. It was utilizing what was in front of me in terms of energy, excitement, possibilities, all webbed around these themes of discipline or community or action.
We have another question from Matthew. If you'd like to introduce yourself first, Matthew.
Sure, I'm Matthew LaFontaine, former intern of Christie's, which is why I'm here. And I'm interested in what Mark was alluding to just now about that kind of that early period and where it changes. Because in this, it starts out with, solidarity, belonging, like really good things to have as a species. But then where does it change? Like, where does it go off the rails into something, sinister, for lack of a better word off the top of my head? And is it that lie that we talked about earlier? What is it that turns these good forces into something malevolent?
I think it kind of goes back to some extent to my thoughts earlier that when people take their passions so far that other people don't matter anymore, it's off the rails. Trying to think with Ron's, when Ron told us it was real, that clearly shifted the whole thing. It was, you know, it was when it was a game, it was you didn't feel like you were hurting anybody. And when it ceased to be a game and you watched some people abusing other people, you began to wonder, wait a minute, they're saying good things, but there's this bad behavior that's going with it. You know, we're going to save the world, but we're going to go beat up people.
Hey, Mark,
And
Mark,
literally or figuratively.
hey, Mark, I think that turning point came with the trials. And
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yes. You're right. That's when I got scared. Should I describe them?
sure.
Okay. You'll see this in lesson plan, but you're right, Ron. I forgot. That to me, that was where I began to realize, like, this is not going to work for me. So what Ron did is he at the very beginning, to set this up, like in the German movie, you've got to have a name and membership cards and a salute and all the different goodies that go with it, the things that go with it. Basically, I would say that in the first few days, he was indoctrinating us, basically. And part of that was Ron set up a Gestapo, a secret police. And he went around the room and he selected 3 people and said, you're going to, quite secretly, and said, you'll be my secret police and you'll tell me what's going on. And we all knew that this had happened. I remember because when I put in my class, we put our head down and he went around the room and whispered in 3 people's ears and tapped them on the shoulder. And I was passed by. So I thought, oh, I don't get to be in the in crowd. And I still remember that because it's, you always want to participate in stuff. And at that point, it wasn't a bad thing. So it was like, oh, that'd be interesting because it's fun to be. I've worked in political campaigns and it's a lot more fun to be in the meetings when you're planning the campaign than doing all the, the sign waving on the street, which is fun too. But it's fun to be on the inside and watch what's going on and be part of it. So what happened then is within a day or two, right, Ron, he started trials and he would pull a piece of paper out of his shirt pocket and he would say, so-and-so. And by this time, a couple of days into it, as you may know, we had to stand at attention and speak to him in short, brief sentences when we answered his questions. So say so-and-so, and they'd stand up and say, yes, Mr. Jones. And he would say, my secret police have told me that you broke such and such a rule. And that's another thing here is he layered on rules every day, more and more rules. And what do you have to say for yourself? And the person would say, I didn't, or I don't remember, or I didn't mean to, or I won't do it again, or who told you? And then Ron wouldn't buy it, and he'd say, okay, is anybody else in the room, would they have seen this person break that rule, or maybe they broke some other rules? What do you think? And the students were a little uncomfortable looking around, and sometimes somebody would say something, but then Ron would prompt them, and he would say, well, wait a minute, if this person broke this rule, then they're going to be guilty, right? And we're supposed to be this really strong organization. We can't have slackers. We can't have people who can't follow the rules. So to one of the students, you say, wouldn't you think this person would be guilty if they didn't follow the rules? And the person would go, yeah, I guess so. And Ron would say, I want to hear it. Are they guilty? Say it. And the person would, okay, guilty. Guilty? Okay, guilty. Another one, you say it, guilty. Together, okay. Then the whole class, guilty. And at that point, he would hand many of you will remember ditto forms, the old purple way of making photocopies. And he would hand the person a ditto that said, you are hereby exiled to the library. You've been removed from the wave, removed from this class, and you're never to come back. Whenever this class meets, you will go to the library until instructed otherwise. And then they'd be shown out the door in front of the whole class. And at that point, that's Ron, you're totally right. That's really when you knew this is not what I thought it was, and I'd better start thinking about this.
Well, I remember Philip Neal saying that my best friend gave me up. And can you imagine when your best friend gives you up? It's a terrible feeling. It's what I've traveled through Eastern Germany a lot, and that's the one thing people talked about. The Stasi, infiltrating communities so thoroughly that a man and a wife couldn't talk to each other about what they were thinking.
Yeah. And Phil was turned into Ron for telling a joke.
Yeah.
And luckily for Phil, if you want to consider that, luck, he was allowed to remain in the class. So might have been thrown out, but he made his joke. Ron stood him up, checked him out, and finally let him sit back down. And he stood me up too, and I got to sit back down. And actually, in my case, it's interesting because a couple of my friends got up and spoke for me, and that's to me, that's always been an important life lesson, as they actually stood up and said, no, he's okay. You know, he's okay. I don't know if he did anything, but he's fine. And Ron said, okay, you can sit down. And not too many kids were brave enough. I wasn't brave enough to speak for somebody. I know a specific incident where I should have spoken up, and I was too chicken.
You know, Mark, this reminds me of one of the other phenomena in this way was the class became a composite of all the different cults you'd find in a school, and that's very rare.
Yeah,
Suddenly,
yeah.
the student population was the executioners from car club, the Dadists that were painting the ceilings blue, the political awareness people, the sports guys. There was a moment when I looked at that group and they looked at each other and realized, my God, we're all together for the very first time. That was powerful. It only lasted about a day, but it was stunning to see that prospect of all the, you know, you've got advanced placement in school. Now these students get extra special treatment, and suddenly we're all advanced placement. It was a different feeling.
Yeah, you're totally right.
We have another question, Eduardo.
Thank you, Katya. Ron, I'm very curious about the journey, the leadership journey that you went on from when you started teaching, when you had that 6-month run up. What was it like? Can you sort of track your journey from the first days coming in as a raw teacher and starting to feel into your influence and the connection with the class and how that built in you? And what do you think made you susceptible to when you realized you had this kind of, I don't know, grip on the class, made you susceptible to sort of taking it direction that you did?
Well, I love being a teacher, first of all. If you're a teacher in an American high school, and Dick will understand this, or junior high, you are surrounded by hopefulness. It's this effervescent energy that students bring to you, their dreams and their aspirations. And if you're a good teacher, you begin to share your passions. It might be sea kayaking, or it might be whatever. In my case, it happened to be history. So that sharing builds this bond between that curiosity and the teacher, and give and take to each other. I would have done that forever. Love teaching, love coaching basketball. It's what I plan to do, hope to do, dream to do. But I realized very quickly after 2 or 3 years at Cumberly that I would not be able to do this. And basically I was asked to leave, and I've never been able to teach again in a public high school. That's the journey. However, having said that, life is unexplained, and I found myself in places I probably would not have found myself. So there's a blessing in finding yourself adrift. I ended up teaching in a mental hospital, and I ended up teaching with the physically and mentally disabled for 30 years. These events would not have happened if I hadn't been, fired from teaching at Cumberly, and then fired from Stanford, and then fired from a psych hospital.
Yeah, I guess my question is more, when I'm hearing that elegant response, my question is more about, like, what did it feel like in your body when you got such allegiance and loyalty from this group of people? I imagine that it must have almost felt like kind of a drug. And I'm juxtaposing that against the idea of Trump at a rally, just feeling into the fervor of life that's there, that's sort of in sync with him, like something rock starish is.
Yeah, Edward, you're just exactly capturing that feeling of euphoria, adulation as people salute you as you walk down a hall. That's pretty powerful. And then you start to think to yourself that maybe you do have the answers. Maybe you have the answers to teach in a more effective way than all the other teachers at the school. Maybe you do have something to say. However, as the thing crescendos, now you feel that you're going to lose that power. And I'm sure this is what Trump is feeling, that paranoia that someone else is going to take over. And you will lose all this momentary feeling of adulation and joy and, you know,
Connection.
power and control. Pretty scary stuff.
Hmm.
One of my most vivid memories is watching Ron. If you imagine a high school with 1,200 kids between classes where everybody's going through the corridors, is Ron had 2 bodyguards in front of him, 2 bodyguards behind him, and he moved through the hallways with all of these kids milling around, and everybody is saluting. The students are saluting him, and the bodyguards are, you know, look, he brought them out of the car club, so they're in their black leather jackets. They're toughs. And I'll never forget watching him go through that mass of students, and everybody's saluting, him saluting, we're saluting, the whole bit. It was pretty impressive.
Ron, do you want that experience for everyone?
Heavens, no.
I mean, that experience of being celebrated that way.
No, I want people to have the experience of being valued and wanted. But my wife and I just went out to dinner, and we were driving down the street, and there was a crossing guard that was helping kids across the street. And both my wife and I looked and said, that's our hero. You know, people doing good things for others, that it's available to us. That's the kind of that's the kind of life I'd like to live personally. And I have lived personally.
Ron, during that week, did you feel that there were, like in the movie we watched, but there were some other teachers that were concerned? Did they talk to you? Did they approach you to discuss? Or did you learn that they were talking behind your back?
No, I was a first, young teacher, and there was a dichotomy between the older teacher and the younger teacher. There were 3 of us younger teachers, and we had no way of, no mentorship, no guidance, no help, no kindness, no exchange of any kind. I kept praying that some teacher will walk in the door in the middle of this and say, what in the hell is going on? What are you doing? I could have pointed at that person and said, this is the answer. This is democracy. This is the questioning that we all need. And I could have concluded the whole thing in that moment. That moment never happened because that fellow teacher never materialized. So when I talk to other today, I say,
tell them about Robert going into the teacher's lounge.
Yeah, well, my own experience is when one of the students became a bodyguard, and he followed me into the faculty room, where a faculty would look at this guy and say, students don't belong in here. And that student saluted and said, I'm not a student, I'm a bodyguard. And I knew at that moment that child, by the way, that's Robert in most of the documentaries you see.
Or Tim in the journal.
Some invisible line. And I had crossed the same line.
And did any of the teachers respond at that moment? Or they let him stay in there as your bodyguard?
No, they asked us to leave.
Oh, okay.
Asked him to leave.
I think Gail had a question.
And then a year later, they asked me to leave.
Well, I was wondering if you had a lesson plan only for the first day. I wonder if you, instead of having it only for the first day, if you had laid it all out for the whole week, and if you made an effort to connect it to the literature, like from the Milgram studies and things of what actually does contribute to that kind of behavior, and then had a debriefing at the end of each class. Okay, how did you feel when I asked you to do X? Or when you, would there have been a way to have made it
educational?
Right.
No, I did not have a written out lesson plan. But people have always asked for an ending that would be more constructive or healthy. And I did not have that either, which is quite sad. It was my failure.
And I can say that he was very, very organized in this class. Otherwise, I have about an inch of notes from the class. And when he would start each block of material, each topic, he would actually hand us a calendar, and we would know day to day what was going to happen. And it was about 6 weeks at a time. The class was fantastic. It was called Contemporary World. It was in social studies. And he taught us in 66, 67 school year about Russia, and this is during the Cold War, about China, and this is during the Cultural Revolution, about Africa, which is being decolonialized at that time. He taught, the wave was part of a section that was about the social conditions that led into World War II. We never studied the war itself. We also did the social conditions leading into World War I. And then when the wave was done in the early April, we had 6 weeks left before the end of school, and we did 6 weeks on Vietnam. So it was an amazing class. It was the timing of it and the topics, and Ron as the teacher, it's still the best class I ever had. I still have, I only saved the notes from 2 classes at Coverly, and Ron's one, and then my 12th grade civics class, which is full of really fun old political brochures. But that class is fascinating, and I have tons of notes in his calendars and all how well he organized everything. But he's right. I have next to nothing during those 2 weeks, just a couple pages of notes, because it was so spontaneous.
It was a fascinating group of students. I mean, I still see them in front of me today. Aline Levine, Wendy Brody, Steve Caniglio. So Steve Caniglio, for instance, transformed everything we did into a musical. So we had the Trial of the Kaiser. So to have those kind of students in front of you really helps you out a lot.
Christy, you had a question.
Oh, I have a ton, but I know we're getting close to the end. So I'm Christy Rodelius Palmer, and I am on the Citizens for Global Solutions, as well as I'm a project director for Human Rights Educators USA. And interestingly enough, when I mentioned this to a number of educators in that network, another person had mentioned that he saw this in his high school, and it was transformative. And I too, back, and this was 1982, 83, we ended up seeing or bringing the 1981 version that some of you haven't seen yet to our school. And we had gone through a number of mergers. So bringing it here to Minnesota, I started at Golden Valley my 10th grade year with a class of 75, and then merged with this other Hopkins to 350. And so our senior year, we were a class of 650. And wow. There was some anti-Semitism going on, and there was a group or a committee that when we were trying to form, how do we become a collective, school and respond to some of the challenges. So we brought the wave to the school, and then wow. There were breakout sessions in this school of 650. All the homerooms did various sessions around this in 1982, 83. Anyhow, I am fascinated right now to think about going back and doing some sort of evaluation with that group of what do people remember, because I think it is an interesting group to evaluate too, similar to Mark. I mean, in a different way. That was kind of the more simulated, all of those emotions that you've been kind of processing. But I'm realizing, as some of us who are human rights educators, who this other person also was very much informed by that experience of the film. So that's one, just a thank you to you, because I do think it raises the film back then raised a lot of questions. And unlike the German film, because I did watch this one for the first time, it doesn't have, the ending is completely different. So I guess one question for you, and I don't want to be a spoiler for some who might go back and see the other, but was the final kind of leader in that, was that the ending for, should I spoil it for everyone? I want to just know, did you actually?
You're asking about the 81 film?
Yeah, the 81 film.
Yeah, the final scene in the 81 film is basically correct.
Okay.
It's not correct in the sense that there weren't a boy and a girl who came in and changed things. And Ron has always said that. He said the young couple in love was added by Hollywood. Okay. But the event itself did take place. We have had a couple gatherings of students when we have high school reunions every 10 years. The last couple times we've actually met in that room. And,
in the auditorium.
We've screened the films as they've been coming out. So
that
it,
same space.
yeah.
Wow.
And for those of you who want to see the 81 film, it's only 44 minutes long. It was on ABC TV. Norman Lear made the film and it got an Emmy. It's very dated, but it's still good. And you can find it on YouTube for free. If you're looking, if you put The Wave into YouTube, look for a 44-minute film. There's 2 or 3 copies of it on YouTube. It's not hard to find. One of them you'll know is the right one because it's got 1 million views. But there's a couple others too that people keep copying and putting it back up. So it's always there at some place.
Well, and what the teacher responded when I said, oh, you know, that we're seeing a German version. I didn't realize that's the one we were seeing. And he's like, oh no, what needs to be shown right now in the US is the 44-minute version. And I agree with him completely. I mean, because it is the German version, you're away. And so you can distance yourself. Whereas the 44-minute version was really, we could say, my gosh, this happened in California. And we were also seeing, I think, probably a closer aligned, from what you've described so far, aligned simulation. Because like there weren't the grades issues that you mentioned were so big, which at least in, I think, the US context, grades are a way to, well, anyhow, mobilize. So anyhow, I'd be very interested, and I know that in talking to some of the human rights educators and thinking about how do we have a similar viewing maybe of the 44-minute version and having you all on a panel, if you might be willing to do that here in the United States.
We would love to help out.
Sure,
Absolutely. Anybody using it anywhere, we want to help them.
Okay.
It's important
Well,
to us to,
oh, sorry.
that's okay. It's important to us too. So we're happy to help.
Okay. And I guess one question I had was Jane Elliott from Iowa was another person that or a similar experiment at that time, but she did the Blue Eyes, Brown Eyes
Correct.
video. And, you know, I came out of school, you know, thinking, okay, I'm going to be modeling and teaching under her tutelage. And she's like, oh, no, I can tell already you're too nice. You're not going to be able to, you know, be this hard, you know, because she also did experiments with adults. And so anyhow.
Did you talk to her?
Have you ever met her? Have you ever connected together and been with
We
her
haven't,
group?
and I've intended to, because she and I actually have a couple of things in common, and I'm making a note to myself to reach out to her. She did it the day after Martin Luther King was killed.
Yes.
The first time. She did it multiple times, but the first time was the day after Martin Luther was killed. By sheer coincidence, that is exactly 1 year to the day from our final day. So they celebrate an anniversary. And then my ancestors, as they moved across the United States, went from Wisconsin to Iowa to California. And in Iowa, of all places, they ended up in that little tiny town where she did her experiment. And they were there 100 years ago. And the town had a town fire, as many of those towns did in those days. And my grandfather's hardware store was burned, and the townspeople looted his store, and he said, we're out of here, and he moved to LA. And so, and there are stories that the townspeople have not been the kindest, at least some of them, maybe not as kindest to her, because they're afraid that it makes the town look racist by the way she did the experiment. So she had a complicated relationship with that town, as my family did 100 years before her.
Well, and yeah, Iowa was actually the first country or state to abolish slavery or sign the Emancipation Proclamation.
Cool.
Anyhow, which I have in my house right now. So I've got roots there too. I would love to follow up with you all on this. And I know that I had like 20 million other questions for you, but I'll stop there because I've taken
Mark and I are
too much of your time. But thank you very much.
Mark and I are usually available, and we'd be happy to talk with you or your students. I want to mention that we also ran across and got to meet Philip Zimbardo because of this experiment. And Philip Zimbardo did the prison experiment at Stanford University, where he placed in the basement of the psych building 2 groups. One were prisoners and one were guards. And within seconds, the prisoners began to abuse. I mean, the prisoners were abused by the guards, and they accepted it.
And there's a movie in Netflix right now about it.
Oh, really?
Yes,
Really?
I will
Say
find.
that again for me.
There is a movie about it going on right now in Netflix or Amazon. I'm gonna look and I'm gonna send you the link and then the correct name.
Yeah, he's been very, as Ron said, we've developed a good relationship with him, and we're very fortunate. He was in the 2010 documentary called Lesson Plan. He is the expert commentator, so we were very lucky that he supported us on that.
Yeah, and you should see The Invisible Line by Emanuel Rothstein. He's a German filmmaker for the German History Channel. That gives you another perspective and some more interviews with students.
Yeah, Ron, I don't know if it's even available in the US yet. It's still so new, but it's coming.
Yeah. Well, you might run your own film festival. I know that this is our time to do things, not just to sit back and wait. I work with a local theater company here in San Francisco, The Marsh, and we got to preview The Invisible Line and show it to that Marsh community. So you're a community. You could probably contact Emmanuel, and he'd let you premiere his video with your community. It's our time to take over. Sounds like wave talk.
Well, and just so you know, San Francisco is actually they're right now piloting, similar to Minneapolis, UNICEF's Child Friendly Cities initiative. So maybe, so we're doing a lot of child rights education and training, and so there might be some collaboration. To think about not the takeover, but to think about how we might even have young people, because this is really about youth empowerment and youth participation. And so I think that link to kind of your lesson plan, and I have not seen that one. So I guess one question that I have around the lesson plan or the re-engagement with the students is, how many students do you feel were really impacted, and how many have been a part of the ongoing lesson formation and a part of the follow-up work right now? And were there others that may have completely checked out that are still having significant challenges?
Well, Mark's website's the best location for information, www.thewavehome.com. That will give you access to lots of thinking that's going on. You'll get to see some of the plays being performed internationally. That's fascinating to me to see how what they represent, how unique they are. I know Mark and I had the theater company in Hong Kong. While they were doing the wave, during intermission, they would rush out and be part of the umbrella movement, then come back into the theater. So Mark is going to give you this wide exposure to what's happening with this particular story.
On the Wave Home, I think for Ron and I both, my favorite page is the theater page on the Wave Home website, because I was able to track down clips from different theater plays and how this story's been interpreted in several different countries. And some are professional productions, some are school productions. It's oh, by the way, you'd love this, that one of at the bottom of my film page, I think it is, somebody took a clip from Harry Potter, and then the movie you just saw, they took the trailer for the German film, and then but the visuals are Harry Potter, so it's really pretty funny to watch. It's about 2 minutes long. But Ron has done a theater play that's been produced in many schools around the U.S. and around the world. I've seen it produced in Jerusalem, Israel, Ron and I supported a professional guy in Spain who did it in the National Theater in Madrid, Spain. It ran for 6 weeks. There's a couple different trailers on the theater page of his play, because he's done it a couple times. It's really fun to watch how different people interpret it. And one of the things we struggle with is, how do you get kids emotionally involved in the story? You can let them watch a movie or read a book, but how do you draw them in? And I find theater is really good. Ron's got not only the play that he's written, but he's also done a musical, which is fantastic. And one of the fun things is his co-writers on the musical included the lead guitarist from the original Steve Miller Band. And so his music is great. Ron did the lyrics, and they I guess they worked on the music, and I really enjoy it. I've really enjoyed it a lot. We have a guy up in Canada who did a rock opera with it, and it just keeps. Ron's been working with another guy who's trying to turn it into a Broadway production one of these days. So you just never know what's going to happen. Back to your question about students. The unfortunate thing is, none of us have a list of who's in the class. So we are totally dependent on people coming forward and saying, I was in the class. And so when we made the documentary, the first documentary lesson plan back in 2010 was when we released it. We spent a few years at high school reunions and talking to friends saying, hey, were you in the class? Do you know who was in the class? And maybe, what do you think, Ron? If I'd say we have maybe 15 or 20 total people who we've identified in the class, lesson plan might have maybe a dozen, maybe not quite a dozen. We've had all the different responses you can imagine. We've had students who say, I wasn't in the class. We've seen students who say, I was in it, but I don't remember it. We have students say, I was in it and I don't want to talk about it. And we have students who say, I was in it and I don't quite, I'm not real happy with it. Then we have, several students who are mostly lesson planners say, I was in it and I learned a lot and it's impacted my life. And so you have all of those responses. One of the most curious ones is on a Facebook comment I saw a few years ago. I forget where, but somebody said, I have a cousin, I think it was, who was in the class and they were traumatically impacted. And so we don't know what that means. We don't know who it is and we don't know what that means. So it's, almost anything you can imagine may have happened in that class, but we've only, out of all the students who participated in it, we've probably documented at most 20. And there's probably a few out there who don't even know any of this is going on, because before the internet, we had no idea. Ron was busy with it before the internet, but the rest of us had gone on to our careers and our families and our jobs. And it wasn't until the internet that we realized just how widespread this thing is has become. And that helped. That also helped with communications.
I was shocked when I started Googling after I realized that we were all watching the German film last week and not the original one. I'm like, wait, I didn't even know there was this other one. And so I had no idea that you had all these lesson plans. And I've done a lot on human rights, so I would have found you earlier. But yeah. So
how did you?
I think that. Oh, go ahead.
I just want to ask you before we all hang up, how you all found it, and and how you've seen it used or have used it, and what you think about it. It's both, whether it's the old film or the new film, because I'd love to hear more from what you all think.
Anyone? Ellen?
Yeah, I'd like to ask a question. I was wondering if, in being in this experience, has this helped you in talking with people who are like under the influence of all this? I'm wondering how this has helped you. You know what I'm saying? You were in that because we know people who are under the influence and wonder how to talk to them.
Well, my most traumatic experience is being with students, and I have a young adult walk up to me and say, I'm contemplating suicide. I feel so alone. I feel so desperate. And it's oftentimes my wife that will help intercede and talk about, finding something that you do enjoy and companionship related to that event or thing. And the other irony that I seldom talk about is I was invited to Germany, Nuremberg, to do an exorcism in Hitler's private chambers. And that to me was the most profound experience, because I met Eva Moses, who was one of the twins. And Mark was with Eva this last year when she passed away. But that has been a profound influence on my life, meeting Eva Moses and telling her story as an exorcism in Nuremberg, Germany, the Gold Room. So life takes us to some strange places. You should know that Mark, for instance, is studying his doctorate on the subject of the Holocaust. So where does life take us? Where do our students go? We can never predict the wanderings and the beauty that they'll discover.
And Mark, you were
yes.
asking, so we do here, what we do is the board members, they give recommendations of movies and documentaries, and I compile everything, send it to everybody, and we vote for the next movie, and that's what we do every month. And this movie was recommendation of Christy.
Oh,
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
And I
That's her recommendation.
And then you
I'll say
surprised her
once
with a
again
different film.
that I watched both movies, the German one and the other, or the lesson plan, and I thought they were fantastic. It was pretty profound experience, especially in context with what just happened in Washington. I think there's relations between the two.
Yeah.
Well, I watched the German version and I thought it was very, I mean, especially timely, of course. But one thing that struck me is, you know, Trump was a sort who, I mean, it was obvious that there's relevance there. It might not be as obvious now that Trump is out, but I am very worried about the present situation, even with Trump out, because
Yeah.
I'm, for example, I'm scared how easy it is. People are told, do X, you know, and the whole world will immediately do that. They'll assume that what they're told is legitimate, it's true, it's, you know, all these things. Now, maybe it is, but I think the fact that that happens is scary. Another comment that I have is that according to Milgram's studies, it seems that the key thing is if an authority is trusted, you know, a legitimate authority, then people will do whatever they're told because they assume that it's legitimate and ultimately for the good of the whole or whatever it is, you know. So the belief in, for example, whatever information source you have, if you trust it, trust is a key thing, and that's based on, is it a legitimate authority? So those are the things that kind of stood out for me.
Yeah, thank you. I agree, because trust is one of the things. We trusted Ron, and that was something at that time we should not have done it.
Having traveled to Israel, I find that there's a lesson there. Everyone's young people are required to participate in military or the government to give back to society in some way. I think that's extremely valuable. And the second thing is that the Israeli military is allowed to question. And again, that's the foundation for sanity, as far as I'm concerned. One, involvement, and two, questioning. What do our youth have? Are they involved? Can they question? Do they question? I have a lot of faith actually in young people. My own grandchildren, for instance. My youngest granddaughter just started teaching in high school, so it's fascinating. So she's biracial and she's reading a book. So my wife is reading the same book, and my wife called my grandchild the other night and said, "Well, Taylor, can I join your class?" Totally expecting her to say, "No, Grammy, stay away." No, she said, "Oh, yes." So I can imagine this grandparent sitting in this Zoom class with ninth graders. I think it's a perfect idea. I think you and I and all of us should be in some Zoom classes with fourth, fifth, sixth, eighth, ninth graders, so we can exchange our ideas and not be afraid. I think we learn a lot from our youth.
That's true.
We actually have a book club going with CGS, a youth book club that we've been reading middle school books, and Jason Reynolds series, and then we're going to read Hate You Give next month. But I agree.
Fun.
Do we have other questions?
What do you think of
Or,
that?
or are there other comments? Do other people have comments about the movie? I mean, was it moving for you? I think that's Mark. I'm interested to know as well.
Well, if I start talking, I may not be able to stop because it's such an amazing movie and an amazing experiment. But maybe a quick one, picking up on one comment that Gail made about critical thinking. So I'll try to make this quick. We've got 70+ million people who voted for the man who just left the White House. Now, if you figure that some of those are Republicans, meaning that they wouldn't vote for Democrat, regardless of who the Democrat is, and then you've got another big segment of the population, which is, let's say, Christian right. They would never vote for the Democratic agenda. I don't know how much those two segments constitute, but that leaves the people that love Trump because of Trump, not because he's a Republican, not because of the Christian rights agenda, but because he represents somebody who says, you know, whites are better than non-whites and all of the things that we've heard. So that's on one side. And then on January 6th, we see a crowd of, I don't remember what the number was, but let's just say a couple of thousand people. And then you see about 300 of them that storm the Capitol and wreak havoc. So going back to Gail's critical thinking necessity, how do you get that sliver of the 70 million people who voted for Trump and its equivalent that we've seen in Washington storming the Capitol? How do you get that population to become a critical thinker so that you avoid the kind of things that we're talking about?
Teach critical thinking to their kids. To answer Christy, this sort of relates back to Christy's question about how do you, or was one of the other questions about how do you talk to people who are maybe sucked into sucked into things. And I've talked in left-wing high schools and I've talked in right-wing high schools. And when I talk in the right-wing high schools, I tend to focus more on the conceptual things. I talk about democracy because we can pretty much all agree on that. And I talk about critical thinking, and I try and keep the politics and religion out of it. I try and do that anyway, but I try and stay on the issues, not to personalize it too much where I will alienate people. But one of the things I feel in what I'm doing as a traveling educator, I guess, is that if I may not be able to change their parents' minds, but if I can at least have the kids become critical thinkers, maybe if more of them will think about things before they jump in. And so I figure that's the most useful thing I can do now.
We need more of you.
Yeah. Well,
Well,
I know some of you have some amazing backgrounds that I've been able to read online. So we're all giving it our best shot in our own way, I guess.
My opinion about what was just asked is, I think the important thing about January 6th, with all that we know about it, is the fact that it happened in our country, in our capital, at least should jog a few people to think about, is this who we are as a society? That before we could tend to think that bad things only happen someplace else, that Hitler was bad or whatever. But this would happen right on our own territory. And I'm thinking that, I don't know how the next few weeks are going to go, or the next few months or few years. But I think getting these militants out of the woods, and some of them creating chaos in the capital of our country, is going to cause people lots of places in lots of different ways, perhaps not very public, to think about, is this who we are? Do we want to be what we just experienced? Just my opinion.
What portion of the population do you think that those people you are referring to, is this who we are? Because obviously it's not you, and it's not Ron, and it's certainly not Katya. But what, and it's certainly not 70 million. So what do you think, how big is this problem?
It's a very small percentage.
Right.
Now, if you just look again at January 6th, I made a prediction after January 6th that everything would be really quiet in the state capitals on the inauguration day, there was nothing that really happened after. It caught people's attention, including the militants. But it only takes one. You know, World War I was sort of the catalyst, with that guy who killed somebody, and the Archduke Ferdinand in Austria. It only takes one. The Oklahoma City bomber in 1995 was part of the militant outliers. It isn't many of them, but it's enough to be of concern. And if I'm right, people are paying more attention to this, and I would hope are more willing to challenge people who are of that mindset, including in our own families. You know, I've got people in my family that would tend to be sympathetic to the far right stuff. I don't think they would show up at the United States Capitol, but they're sort of inclined to that direction. And looking back to the film, the two films, in that class of yours, Ron, there were just a few people that challenged the status quo, and there were a few people that hook, line, and sinker took it on, and then there were the rest who were somewhat, you know, fluid followers. They, you know, they don't want to rock the boat or whatever the case might be. The film to me represented society. So did the riot and the chaos in the Capitol represented society. Very complex group.
But you have the QAnon, I mean, that is very similar, I think, you know, to, okay, you're a special group and you're, you know, and you're feeling like you're kind of a part of the clan. And so I think that it's, as Mark said early on, you know, the fact, you know, we all are it. I mean, we are the good, the evil, and it's whether, I believe that, and it's, you know, when are we able to stand up? And when can't we? And I think, Ron, you mentioned the questions, you know, you said, oh, but no one questioned. And so maybe the faculty knew what was going on, and maybe they kicked out, I mean, the one incident that they didn't let someone come in the faculty lounge, but they were bystanders. They didn't do anything. And you know, it sounds like cut off the questioning, because otherwise people would be sent to the library. So when you start, you know, setting up those regimens, and then people are fearful to be kicked out of the club. Yeah, I think well, I hope you're right, Dick, but I think that the critical, you know, being able to teach how to question, and even question when it's tough, or to stand up when you see an act of discrimination happening. We know some people stand up, but more oftentimes there's a lot of us, you know, a lot of bystanders watching.
I want to bring up one thing before we get off that comes to mind with this conversation. The last movie that we saw is The World Is My Country, about Gary Davis, who was an activist in World War II. And I'll send a little information about it. But I happen to get real actively involved in the making of that film, to the extent that I saw the early rough drafts of the film, and part of CGS was very much involved with it. But anyway, what struck me, the very first cut of that rough draft of that film was two scenes from one of them from a live interview with, or talk to an audience in New Hampshire. And the other was when Gary Davis was talking to a large audience in Paris in 1948. And in both of these cuts, the piece that I remember, which never appeared in the final cut of the film, was some guy getting up in the audience, both in New Hampshire and in Paris, and telling Gary Davis to be leader. We need somebody to tell us what to do. What do we do? And it was really troubling to Davis, who was a Ron Jones in the context of human rights. right after World War II. It was really troubling to him. And I also noticed that it is not in the current film. Neither one of those pieces of dialogue, which were made by real people in real time, one in 1948 and one in whenever it was, 1990. And it's just interesting to me that a Hitler has to have followers who want to be led. Now, there's 13 of us on here right now, or 12, or whatever the number is that's left. But you know, we're the population. What is it that we, each of us, are going to do with this experience we've had tonight or watching the film? It's going to be different for me than it's going to be for Christy, than it's going to be for Gail. We all have some feelings when we go offline tonight. What do we do as citizens about this individually? That's a question we need to ask ourselves. Is it just a movie? Was it a good movie? Wasn't a good movie? Da, 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 da. What do we do? That's what's facing our society generally.
Two things would help, Dick. One would be to work towards getting rid of arms, you know. Oftentimes, the kind of indignities we see that are committed a lot more easily when people have means to commit them. And I just don't understand why we have arms that people just carry, walking with guns, walking with all kinds of, I come from another country, and I'm just shocked that no one objects to this idea of carrying arms. The other thing is, we need to have truth in advertising. I haven't seen anywhere the kind of lies, the sort of alternate reality, so to speak, in the name of freedom of expression. You know, people pass out on websites, on cable news, and all the sort of pundits of various kinds spew out. And a lot of people who don't have time to study these things, they're too busy in their everyday life, they hear these things and they come to believe it, you know. It's a kind of thing where people who have a position of some standing need to also have integrity and need to be able to speak the truth. I mean, we had, the last 4 years, a leader who just spoke whatever he wanted to. It didn't matter whether it was true or not. And these are the simple things. I mean, if we just pay attention to that in our interactions with people where we see these things, maybe things can change, you know. Anyway, just a couple of thoughts about how to make life a little better, you know.
And Mirella just sent a message saying that she lived through an experiment like this, but for her it lasts 25 years and it's not fun. Mirella is from Romania, right?
Actually, I really don't understand why, you know, we accept after Sandy Brook and all these places where so many innocent people got killed, that we can't have legislation on this. Does anyone have any thoughts on why arms are so, I mean, for driving a car, you need a license. You know, why people oppose having a license to carry arms, for example, or to possess an arm, you know, which is so deadly. And so many innocent people die because of that. I understand a lot of people die within their own social group because of the armaments that are there. Anyway, anyone have any thoughts on that? I'm always perplexed by it.
Well, it's 8:35 Central Time, United States. And I think in respect to everybody's time, unfortunately, we're going to end, but we are so grateful and honored with the presence of Ron Jones and Mark Hancock. We appreciate you both so very much for being here for us, for being so honest and open to us. I really enjoyed our conversation here, and behind the scenes was so good. I hope that we can keep in touch. And I think I would like to hear, last few words from both of you, Mark and Ron.
Real quickly, I don't know if we mentioned it, besides the 81 movie being on YouTube, for some of you already know that our documentary lesson plan is free on Amazon Prime Video. And otherwise it's a couple bucks, but it's easy to get to it right now.
Mhm.
I'm honored that you took the time to study our story and look into it and try and understand it. We're still trying to understand it. But it's like we said, like I said, it has a life of its own. And as Ron said earlier, I had no idea. No, 15 years old in that classroom, I wouldn't have dreamed to be doing this now.
All right.
And I'm 70 in a few months, and it gives me purpose in life to try and do good with this story, because I see so many people using it to try and do good, and I feel my job is to help them, and whatever I can do, I want to do. And it's a nice place to be. I'm not quite retired, but I'm close, and so it's a nice shift in my life, and I really value it because I can go to where my heart is now instead of just trying to make enough money to pay the mortgage. So we're honored to have been invited tonight, and I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you.
Well, maybe I'll just finish then with, I'm a poet, so I like to write poetry. There's a moment in time that comes to everyone, this moment in time. It's not expected, but something is wrong. Injustice right in front of you. What will you do this moment that is here today? Will you speak out loud or pray it away this moment? The choice you must make for silence and fear, or a risk that will take you to freedom, freedom. What will you do? There is a moment. Thanks for giving us this moment.
Yeah.
Oh.
Thanks.
Hi, Mark. See you later, alligator.
Got it, guys.
Thank you so much.
Thank you,
Thank
everybody.
you both. Thank you, Ron. Thank you, Mark.
I learned something every time. Thank you.
Thank you so very much. And I hope to see you all next month for the move of the month that soon we will release the name. Thank you again, Ron and Mark. We love you.
Thank you. I'll probably ask to weigh in some of your future ones so I can watch the movies with you.
Perfect.
Wonderful.
Yes,
You're
that would
welcome.
be
Open.
amazing. Mark, you will get rid of me so easily now.
Put me on the email list and I'll try and join in once in a while.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good night, everybody.
Take care, you all. Keep the faith.
Katya, can you stay just for 1 minute?
Yes.
Let's see. Oh, there it is.
Thank you for coming, Jack.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed that.
Yeah, hi, Mariola. You were so quiet in there.
Hi.
Wonderful.
Good night. So I wanted to tell you that I discovered this Brazilian app for watching free movies. It's called Stremio. So I don't know if you've come across it.
What's the name?
Stremio. STREMIO.
Yeah, because now you have Brazilian connections. You still have, right?
Yeah, exactly. I don't know if it's legitimate or it would be difficult to tell everybody about it.